Hi guys, welcome to the 2x4 Chef. What we're going to do today is we're going to make two separate meals to create one. Some of my favorite food in the world is Italian food. Its simplicity, simple ingredients, the flavors. You can't beat really well-made Italian food. So what I'm going to make today, I'm going to make sauce, or as they say in New York, gravy, or pasta sauce or pizza sauce, for our second dish, what we're going to use it for, which is eggplant parmesan. So we're going to do it in two steps. And first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make our pasta sauce, and then I'm going to show you how to make the eggplant parmesan. So let's get started. There are several ingredients that I use for making pasta sauce. First of all, you're going to need one onion, and I use about half a head of garlic. I like garlic. I like the flavor of garlic, the pungency of garlic. I find that to use too little doesn't enhance it, and of course you don't want to use too much unless you have a big family that loves a lot of garlic or a lot of friends that love a lot of garlic. I'm also using fresh basil. Now this is basil from a garden. As you can see, it's still on the branch, and do not use or cut the basil up beforehand, and I'll tell you why. When you're using fresh herbs, especially basil, and it smells wonderful, when you cut any herb up, the oils, the essential oils that are within these leaves break open. So if you decide to chop up your basil when you get started and put it aside, you're going to lose the ability of all those oils when you throw it in with the dish you're making to release themselves. So I always like to wait till the end of my dish to, especially with pungent basil, it's just a magnificent way to enhance flavor. You also don't want to add your basil in while you're cooking unless you go towards the end, and I'll explain that as well as we go. I also have fresh parsley, which we're going to cut up. Why do we use parsley? Parsley is very clean, has a really great flavor for an herb, doesn't overpower, and it balances out the flavor of your sauce. A lot of marinara sauces use the parsley in it, and there are two types of parsley. There's curly parsley, and then there's the Italian flat leaf, which is what we're using for this dish. Of course, Italian flat leaf parsley. You're also going to need 1 to 2 bay leaves. You can find bay leaves at any supermarket. They're readily available. You can keep them for a long time. Why? They're already dried out. So you don't have to worry about buying them and worrying if they're going to go bad. They're not going to go bad. I use bay leaves in stews. Bay leaves I crumble up to use as a tenderizer for meats. It has a great use, and as we go along with the 2x4 Chef, I'll show you how to really utilize basil in a lot of different ways. I also have a combination of dried oregano and dried thyme. Why we use dry herbs instead of fresh herbs compared to the basil. When you're cooking, especially oregano, if you use fresh oregano and cook it in a sauce, what I find is that you get a burned flavor. It's the same thing when using basil. You don't want to add basil in at the beginning of your sauce. You want to add your basil in towards the end, because when you're using the fresh herbs, if you overcook an herb, it becomes bitter. And the last thing you want is bitter sauce. So right in here, I have 2 teaspoons of dried thyme, and I have 3 teaspoons of oregano. I also have half of a carrot shredded. Now you're saying, I've never heard of anybody putting carrot in my sauce before. What you have when you use canned tomatoes, since we're not going to be using fresh tomatoes, you have a lot of acidic qualities because these tomatoes have been grown, processed, and then put into cans. You don't know how they're going to taste until you open the can, and usually you have a lot of acidic levels. Some of the producers use a citric acid to control the pH in the can. And what is pH? pH is a value that happens when the pH gets too high in a food or in a canned food. It'll cause mold. So that's why they use citric acid to balance out and control your pH. And it's very important to use this. It doesn't change the flavor of anything, but it creates, you get this sort of flavor sometimes that you really don't want because you're using, these are fresh tomatoes that are canned, and it happens. Now, when it comes to canned tomatoes, now there's a lot of different types of canned tomatoes out there. There's different brands. If you're on a budget, I find the best thing to do is to go by buying, trying them out, and seeing who you like the best. I bought these tomatoes at the store. They were two 32-ounce cans for $3, which made them $1.50 each, which was a pretty good deal. So I thought it was a really good deal to get this big of a can. Now, I'm using 32-ounce cans because I'm making a lot of sauce. You can use a 15-ounce can too. You can control that with, if you want to use 15-ounce cans, you can send me an email at 2by4chef@att.net, and I can give you the different measurements to use for your sauce with your ingredients to balance it out so you don't overrun it with too much spice. Now, I'm using 3 different types of tomatoes today. I'm using tomato puree, I'm using crushed tomatoes, and I'm using diced tomatoes. Why? Because it creates different textures, and it makes for a much better sauce. If you're gonna use whole tomatoes, what some people do is they grind them down in a food mill, which mostly you're not gonna have. So I like to skip that and just buy already crushed tomatoes and tomato puree. The whole tomatoes you could use, but you're going to have to crush them in your hands to break them down into the pan. And that's a whole nother process, and it's time consuming. So it's easier to buy crushed tomatoes and tomato puree. And we're going to use that too. You're also going to need tomato paste. And once again, tomato paste is inexpensive, very easy to find, and you can get it at any store. Another thing you're going to need is olive oil. Olive oil, again, is very important. I buy my olive oil for cooking at either Costco or Trader Joe's. You can buy their private label brand, which is very inexpensive and excellent quality. You don't have to spend a lot of money on olive oil for cooking. I spend a lot of money on my olive oils for using at the table, for dipping for breads, for adding on top of a dish when you serve it. That's where you get an expensive olive oil that has a lot of intense flavors, and it's much better to use a high quality olive oil when you're not using it for cooking. This is not a low quality olive oil, it's an excellent olive oil. It's just, once again, I've got this for less than $10. And this is extra virgin, beautiful olive oil. It's got a nice bite to it, it's very nutty, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful product. Now, what we're going to start with is you have your pan here. Here's the pan I'm going to use, which is a heavy bottomed saucepan. Why is it heavy bottomed? If you use a thin metal pan, you're not going to be able to control your heat inside the pan. It's going to get very hot in spots. You want to have an even flow of heat so you don't get burned in the middle, which is very important. So what we're going to do first is we're going to turn our pan on, and we're going to do it to a medium heat. And while we're doing that, we're going to take our onion. Now, I've already diced up half the onion. So did I cut corners and do it before? Yes, but I want to show you an easy, quick way to dice an onion. What you like to do is also try and have a really good knife. Knives are the key, a good knife. This is my Global knife. It's lighter, it's got great balance. It's called a chef's knife because of the length of the blade. And it's easy to work with, they're easy to keep, they sharpen, they're wonderful. So what you do is you take your onion and you start at about a little above the bottom, and you slice across the bottom, and then you do another slice, you come up a little bit more. You want to make 3 slices in the onion. And then what you have to do is you're going to go lengthwise from the top, and you're going to cut down on the onion, and you're going to do lengthwise cuts across, go all the way across, and it's about, I'd say about a 1/4 inch wide for each cut. And what are we doing? Well, we're going to make a dice. And how are we making a dice is that we're separating the onion in layers, So when you cut it, you have instant dice. Now you can do a small dice by cutting very close to the edge, or you can do a wider dice by coming a little further. So it's up to you how big of a dice you want. The bigger the dice you have, the bigger the size of the onion that's going to be in your sauce. You don't want to do 1-inch size because it's way too big. And I like to do like 1/8 to 1/4 inch. So what I'm going to do is finish this off, and we'll put it in with the rest of the onion that I've already cut. Now, a lot of people are afraid to use knives, and I understand that. Simply, you will occasionally cut yourself. If you are afraid to use knives, what I suggest is find a store that sells cooking supplies. There are a lot of them out there now because cooking is so popular, and you ask them if they have a class that shows you how to use knives. There's a lot of culinary schools out there that have what I call secondary education. They'll teach you how to sharpen your knives, how to handle your knife. Knife skills are the first thing you learn when you go to culinary school. So it's very important to learn how to handle a knife and not to be afraid of it. What I'm going to do now is I'm also going to pour about, I'd say, 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup of the olive oil at the bottom of the pan to get it started. I'm going to put my onion in now so it starts to cook. And while we're waiting for this to get going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my garlic. Now, once again with garlic, you don't have to mince it. I'm going to show you a couple tricks here that's very simple to do. Is using the fat end of your knife, you take a piece of garlic and you put it under and you hold it on top. You take your hand above and you press it down. What does that do? That releases the garlic from the skin. It's very, very simple to do. And you have a dish there where you throw your skin, and then you can put your piece to the side because you have several to do. So I'm going to do these really 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to cut them up, and I'm going to show you another quick trick to help you with garlic when you're using it on a knife, because garlic has a lot of natural oils in it. That's that beautiful smell of garlic when you cut open garlic, and it's all, you feel it on your fingers. It gets a little sticky. It's really, that's the essence of garlic. Just like in herbs have oils, well, onions and garlic too do also. The difference with the garlic though and its oils that it releases when you break it down like this is that it has a sticky quality. And when you're working with it or cutting it on a knife, it tends to clump, meaning it sticks to your knife, it clumps together, it's kind of hard sometimes to move around. And really, the easiest thing to do when you are going to be working with cutting garlic, or working well with a lot of garlic, is I like to use kosher salt. Kosher salt is, once again, readily available. It's got a great flavor. I prefer it than iodized table salt. It doesn't have the density. It's also been treated. Kosher salt has a nice coarse quality to it. You can use other salts such as sea salt. Now I caution you with sea salt. Sea salt is very, very pungent because it comes from the sea. So all of you know from being in the ocean, those of you who've been in the ocean knows if you get a mouthful of seawater, that's a lot of salt. And that's exactly what you're going to get, is that pungent and heavy salt flavor. Why? Because sea salt is very, very strong. It's much stronger than kosher salt. So if you're going to use it, cut your salt use in half, always. And I really don't like to use a lot of salt to start with my dish because I like to be cautious with salt. The problem with salt is once you use too much salt in a dish, it's very difficult to go backwards with salt. It'll ruin your dish. And that is why you use as minimal amount of salt as possible, and you taste, or what we call adjust later. See how it doesn't stick to my knife because I used some of the salt? And we're going to sort of rough chop this. We don't want it too fine. We don't burn. We want a lot of flavor. So there you go with the garlic, and we're going to scoop the garlic up and put it into one of my side dishes. Now I always like to say to everyone, always have your ingredients prepared ahead of time. This is very, very, very important. Why is that? You know, if you ever use a recipe and you just go and start using the recipe and not have everything ready, you may miss something. And that happens a lot. It's happened to me when I first started. As a kid, I would mess up left and right, and after I was done, I would say, oh man, I forgot this and this. So when you start, you see I have my steel bowls here that held the onion. It has my parsley, my basil. I have my glass dishes. Now, this is a small kitchen, so I have not a lot of space to work with, so I'm trying to keep it as condensed as possible. And when I'm done, I put my dirty dishes in the sink and get them out of the way. And that's very, very important. So you can, I don't know if you can hear the onion starting to cook up, what it is, and it gives a beautiful, fragrant flavor, and you can see the steam coming up and it's cooking beautifully. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in the carrot. Now the carrot's going to cook down, and we're going to add in a quarter of the garlic. You don't want to add in all of it, you're going to add in some later. But a quarter of the garlic in, and then I'm going to add half of my herbs, my dry herbs, my oregano and my thyme. And what's this going to do? It's going to make the onions and everything fragrant, and it cooks up really nice and softens everything up, and you're going to have that sweetness along with your pungency of your garlic. And once again, why we're using the carrot in the sauce is because we want to have a balanced, non-acid taste in our tomatoes. We're also going to use something that, towards the end of it, is sugar. And why do we use sugar? Sugar is a natural sweetener to counterbalance as well the heavy acid flavors of tomatoes. Now, going back to tomatoes real quick, if you want to buy super quality tomato, there's this tomato out there called San Marzano tomato. Now, San Marzanos are especially from a place called San Marzano, Italy. And they're these beautiful plum tomatoes that the true San Marzanos cost about $4 a can to $6 a can, depending on where you're living. And they are super sweet, and they're perfect. But if you're going to make a dish when you're buying, you want to make tomato sauce and keep it inexpensive, you want to keep your cost under $10. Well, if you buy 3 cans of San Marzano tomatoes, you're already at $12 to $15 just for 3 cans of tomatoes. Now, if you can afford that and you want to use that high quality tomato, by all means use it and experience it, because it's a wonderful tomato to use. Now, I also caution you that there are companies that say San Marzano tomatoes on the can, but always read where they're made from. If on the back of the can, it's going to tell you back here, if you see, it's going to say distributed or imported. If it says imported, that means they're actually San Marzano tomatoes. What a lot of companies have done is they have the San Marzano seeds and they bring them over to the US and they grow them here in the United States. Now, does that make them less? Well, I'll tell you the truth, I've used them and the quality is not the same. And why is that? Because the soil over in Italy is much different than the soils over here in the United States. It's the same as wine. The wines that are made in France, where the grapes are grown, are much different flavors than the ones that are grown here in the United States, such as in Washington, California, Oregon, because of the soil. And that's very, very important. Now, what we have now, if you can want us to take a look, is you see everything mixed together. And now we're going to add in our tomatoes. Now, also when you're working with the cans, you want to have a spatula because you want to get everything out of that can. So we're going to take each of the cans and also pour away from you. Do not pour towards you. You want to, and hold it so it doesn't splatter. So always make sure you pour it into the can, into the pan, and you want to get everything out. You want to make sure you get everything out of the can, because why waste it? Some people just throw it in there and leave tomatoes in there. I don't like to do that. Now we're going to throw in our puree. See how I poured it in carefully? And then I'm going to make sure that everything is out. You also have to be careful about splatter, because it's going to happen. And now you want to pour. So make sure you adjust your heat, because it starts boiling. What boiling is pockets of air coming, surfacing, causing from the bottom of the pan to the top, and they come to the surface and they open up. And that's what boiling is. It bubbles to the top. And what that does is sometimes it'll splatter up. It can hit you in the face. You have to be careful. Do not lean into your pan. I don't do that. If I'm going to smell something, I will use my hand like this. What that's called is wafting it. You bring the flavors up from the smells up to your nose. It's very dangerous to stick your face over a pan. Always remember that. Now, we have the remaining garlic that we are going to put into our pot. There you go. Now I have about a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of sugar, about a tablespoon and a half, and you want to put that in as well. The rest of the dried oregano and thyme goes in, and also my 2 bay leaves. And we want to put those in like that. Now you want to give this a quick stir. Now this is also has a thickness to it already. What I like to do, because it's good for the cooking process, is that I want to take a little bit of water. So I take one of the empty cans. I always use the cans to keep my utensils in while I'm cooking. And you fill it about a quarter of the way. You see, about a quarter of the way with water. And you pour your water into your sauce. It gives it a nice thinness, which you're going to need while you're cooking. You don't want to cook your sauce too fast where it's going to burn. So you want to make sure it cooks evenly, and that's why I use a little bit of water, which gives it a nice thinness to it. Because we're going to add tomato paste, and what tomato paste is it's basically a thickener. It's concentrated tomatoes, and all the water is out of it basically, and it makes this thick paste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how thick it is. I'm going to use a teaspoon, and I'm going to use about half a can. So I would say that's about a half a can tomato paste, and I'm going to put it into my sauce just like that, and we can put that over there for later. And we will stir this up some more, and we want that to get nice and done. And turn it up a little bit. Now, you don't have to cover this. I don't suggest covering it. You want it to warm up. You don't want it to get too hot, because if it gets too hot, then you're going to have a problem when you have it. It's going to burst all over your kitchen and splatter. And if it does get too thick, you can always add more water. Now, some school thought, some people like to put wine in their sauce. I don't. To me, it doesn't matter. It's what your flavors are. Since I'm making a sauce that is going to be for eggplant, well, I'm not going to add wine to it this time, because you want the sauce to complement the eggplant. You don't want, when you put wine in, it adds another bold flavor in. You don't want your sauce too bold when you're making eggplant parmesan. Sometimes it's just a little too much. Now, if I'm doing meatballs and spaghetti or something, I like my sauce really robust, and I will add in wine, and we'll do that another time. So right now, just have that, and what we have to also do is we have to add in our salt. Now I'm going to add in a couple pinches, which is amounts about a teaspoon each. That's all I'm going to use right now. I said, I don't really want to use too much salt. I'm also going to add fresh ground pepper. I like to say about 5 or 6 turns. Now, if you do not have fresh pepper available, you can use ground pepper. I suggest putting in about a teaspoon to start with. Remember, you can always adjust after. So what you also want to do is once you get all of that together in your pot, you want to stir it up, and you should taste it. Why? Well, before it's cooked, you want to see if your pasta sauce is what it tastes like. Is it sweet? Is it a little too sweet? Is it a little too bitter? And it gives you a good idea of what you will need to do in order to make it to adjust it. So I'm just going to take a little and taste it. And actually, this one is very well balanced. And I'm not saying that because I made it. It's just fortunately these tomatoes happen to be very well balanced and have a nice sweetness. And so this is going to be a really, really nice sauce to work with. Now you're going to want to cook this for about, I would say, a half an hour about a half an hour. That's the easy thing to do. Sometimes what I do is I cook my sauce fully, add all my herbs at the end, and then I let it sit. Sometimes I let it sit overnight. Why is that? Because the longer you let your sauce sit, the more the flavors meld together. And it's very important. It's like a marinade. When you marinate a piece of food, a meat, a chicken, a fish, you don't pour your marinade on and then use it half an hour later unless you're in a devil of a rush. And if you are, so be it. But when you let flavors marinate and overnight and work themselves together, the flavor only improves overnight. And I know that sometimes I use fresh pasta sauce, and then the next day it's got 10 times the amount of flavor in there, and it's like, wow, I should have waited. But today we can't because we're making a dish, but it's going to be enhanced because we're using it along with making something that's really fantastic. So what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to let you see, is it's starting to bubble up. See how it's bubbling up? You can see the little bubble marks. And you want to keep an eye on it and always give it a stir, because also you have the tomato paste in there and you want to break the tomato paste down as well. You don't want to have a big clump of tomato paste in there, and you don't want to serve somebody a big clump of tomato paste, especially if you're serving pasta. It doesn't come out too well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our fresh parsley, and now also using a knife. Now I'm using a good amount to cut with. You can cut it in half, use less if you want. It's easier for you to work with, and I'll show you. When I chop something of this, when you're using an amount of food that's wide, especially with herbs, put your hand on top of your knife here, and you want to hold it up. See how the tip is down, and you want to rotate across it. And I scoop it back together to get another cut, and you keep cutting to the desired cut you want. Now I like to chop this almost not coarse, but between medium, fine, and coarse. So you don't want it too thin because you really want to know that it's in your sauce. So you can see what I did is I have how it's got nice texture to it, and I love the smell of parsley when it's cut, like any herb actually. So we'll put that over here into my other bowl, and we'll do the rest. And I'm going to do a much wider cut because it's easier for me. Now you can see I'm using the stem, and you can use the stems for parsley. There are some herbs you don't use the stems for. Simply cilantro, which is also known as coriander, which is used widely. Cilantro is used widely in Mexican food. It's a very unique flavor. You can use the entire part of the leaf and the stem for cilantro. With parsley, I use part of the stem. It has a lot of flavor in it, but you don't want to use the stems on the ends for your basil. As you see, you don't want to use those because it's the flower end. You don't want to use those. and any other herbs, but mostly with parsley and as well cilantro, it's not a problem. Now, if you're not comfortable and you don't want to use the stem, you hold the stem in your hand like this, and you take your two fingers, your thumb and your first finger, and you pinch and pull, and you discard the stem, and there you have the whole piece of parsley that you can use. But as you can see, I don't have to do that because I'm using the entire part, and I'll tell you, you're not going to know the difference, except you're just going to get a lot of flavor, which is very, very, very important, because here at the 2x4 Chef, I want to introduce you to making simple flavors that are not complicated and not expensive to do. And you know, it's cooking is for some people it's love, and for other people it's a chore. And I'll tell you, you can't convince a person to fall in love with cooking if it's a chore for them. But even if it is a chore, I hope I'm going to show you things that are going to make your meals less expensive, but you're going to get a lot of great food and great flavors, and you're going to try something a little different. Now, really, you're going to say, Chef, come on, pasta sauce isn't that different. Well, no, it's not. But pasta sauces are different everywhere. And it's just like a painter. If you had all the painters that had the same paintings, then we wouldn't have Picasso or Van Gogh or the millions of different painters that are out there, because they created their own style of painting, their own style of how they like to portray and how they see the world. Well, the simplicity is when you're making pasta sauce, I can send you to 3 restaurants, let's say in New York City, 3 different Italian restaurants that could be on the same block, and I guarantee you each one of their sauces tastes different, smells different, different texture. They're different. Why? Because there's different regions, people are brought up cooking differently, they're shown different techniques. And is mine the best? Well, maybe, but I like it simply because I've had a lot of opportunity to see how different people have made their sauces, and I've adopted a lot of their different techniques into their sauce making. And to put it simply, hey, it's all a matter of flavor and choice. If you want to change what I'm doing in certain ways, if you want to add more oregano, if you want to add less, add more salt, be my guest. It's up to you. I'm giving you a guide here and a simplicity. And once again, if you have any questions, all you need to do is shoot me an email at the 2x4chef@att.net. Now that's the number 2 and a big X, uppercase X, and the number 4 at att.net. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get close to the time where we're going to be putting in our rest of our herbs. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in the parsley into it, and it's very, very fragrant, and we're gonna cut it in or tie it in, as you can see, and it blends in really nice. What I did is I turned the heat down too, because it's starting to slow boil, and I don't want to overcook it because I'm going to let the sauce sit. I'm not going to cook it for an hour or 2 hours, and I know you've seen the movies where they say, oh, the sauce takes hours and hours. Well, if you're making a meat sauce, or you're making veal in it, or bones, or I mean, there's very many variations. Some of those sauces take hours to make. This is what you can call it, a quick sauce. You can call it anything you want, simple pasta sauce. The simpler the better. Some of us don't have a lot of time in the kitchen to cook and stand there for hours, and that's what makes it completely okay to not have to cook your sauce for several hours. Because this way you're getting a lot of different herbs and flavors melded together, and once you've cooked it and put all the ingredients in, stirred it, and especially now I'm going to add the basil. I want to stop cooking it. So after I add the basil, I'm going to take it off the heat, I'm going to put my lid on it, and I'm going to let it sit, because then we're going to go do the eggplant. So as soon as we do the eggplant, and you're going to see I'm going to put everything together. Boy, I wish you were here to smell this. I have a basil plant, and it's produced some beautiful, I mean, look, it's beautiful basil. I also make a lot of my fresh pesto, which is my favorite. Now, with the basil, there's different ways of cutting it. Some people like to, what we call chiffonade, which is very, very, very thin, which is good for certain dishes. But when you're making pasta sauce, I like to stack them. You can do 2 stacks, you can do 1 stack. But just remember, if you're okay with a knife, then make it easy on yourself. Do as minimal as possible to start with and learn and get more comfortable. I don't mind stacking it. I'm not going to chiffonade it. I'm going to just rough cut it. So see how what I did is I took the leaves, stacked them up, and I'm just going to fold them over like once. And then tuck them again. And once we're going to do a cross, and then I'm just going to chop. And there you go. See, it made a nice texture. The basil's a nice texture, and we're going to put that in right now in my dish here for the rest of the basil, and we're going to fold it over, and we're going to do this real quick. Now, what you're smelling is the release of those oils from the basil, and it's just a magnificent, magnificent flavor. So there's all our basil. Now you can add more if you want. What I'm going to do is put the basil in. I'm going to stir it in, and then I'm going to shut it off, just like I promised. So I don't want you to say that, hey, he didn't shut it off. Now that immediately cuts the heat off, and it also allows the sauce time to rest. And you want your sauce to rest because you do not want your sauce to overcook. So I've covered my sauce, I've taken it off the burner, and what I didn't tell you is I don't have gas here, unfortunately, because it's such a small kitchen, and in this apartment they don't have gas. So when you're using electric, first of all, you can't adjust electric heat quick enough like you can a gas stove. A gas stove you can make hotter or use less heat right away. When you shut off electric, the burner is still hot. So make sure you take your pan off the burner once you shut it off, because if you don't, you're still cooking. So we're going to let that rest, and I'll be back in a little bit, and we're going to go over making our eggplant. Thank you for watching.